You give me one shot here on a blue chip stock, believe me, Kevin, the only problem you're gonna have is that you didn't buy more.
Nobody knows if the stock is going to go up, down, sideways, or in circles.
What's going on, NBA draft fans? Your boys are back. The Wolves of Wall Street. Your favorite draft analyst. It's a Draft Act NBA Draft Show. My name is Corey Tulba, and I'm here, as always, with my co-host, Albert Garbage Time. Albert, what's cracking, dude?
Everything is cracking. Is that the proper answer? No, all is good. Really good to be back. Really excited to be recording today. It's not every day that we get to have a special guest join us for a pod, so it feels great. And I'm going to stop talking and let you introduce our special guest today.
Yeah, we do have a very special guest. We have Sports Illustrated's Jeremy Woo in the house to go over what some people on the internet have called the worst mock draft they'd ever seen. Is that correct, Jeremy?
Yeah, that's what we're tracking as these days, which is cool. It's fine with me.
Where it's all jokes here.
It's
thank you so much for thanks so much for hopping on the show just to talk some NBA drafts, some prospect stuff with us clowns. I guess we should probably just get right into it. You went chalk 1-2, Scoot, and Victor 1-2. Feels like we don't have to go over too much discourse about those guys, but I think where your mock draft has really converged from a lot of other mocks out there, rankings and whatnot, is that right away you get Anthony Black at number 3. So when you're doing your mock, you put in there, it's a bit of mix of your own personal scouting and then a lot of intel. Ant Black at 3, is this an intel play, or is this something that you've just seen as a guy who 6'7" with passing feel and is kind of fitting the direction that the league has trended towards?
Yeah, well, let me say this. Like, I think one, it's January, so we're all just kind of like, there's only so much we know, even though we think we know things from watching the games. But this time of year, we don't know that much still. And I think, when I do this mock, it's like, I obviously would love to get everything right, but I know that I'm not going to in January. And so part of what I try to do is like challenge some of the ideas that are out there when I'm doing it. So I would say everything I do has some intel behind it, like, without getting like too deep into like the what behind that. It's like, I know that he is somebody who is in the conversation that high. I just thought it'd be interesting because again, the mock takes in fit, and there's the team picking was Houston. And I just saw them play when they were in Chicago last month, and they do not need people to shoot the ball more. So, I took those things into account. But again, like, I'm not saying Anthony Black is going to get picked 3rd, but there are people who have him ranked 3rd, and there are people who are talking about him that high in the draft. So I was just trying to sort of, make a point and sort of do something interesting there. So I don't know. I might have him there. I haven't decided, but I think the case for him being that high is pretty real. I think it's really where the draft starts is 3, which is, I guess, kind of obvious, but like, we can say it. I mean, we know who the first 2 picks are going to be unless something crazy happens. And yeah, I mean, everyone has a different opinion on this. Like, anyone you ask is going to have a different opinion around the NBA. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. We'll see what happens, and it's going to depend on which team is picking there. But I really do think Black is really interesting. Just if you look at sort of the mold of guys who have succeeded in terms of like just being oversized feel guys who are just so good at like being in the right place. And I think he has a lot of untapped upside too, because he's really big. He's going to get stronger. He's a good athlete. He might get more athletic once he really has time to build that, because he sort of was a later blooming prospect. I tend to like guys like that. And like, yeah, his shot's not great, but like, if you look at the guys we're talking about, most of these guys are not. It's not a great shooting lottery. I mean, Miller's a good shooter, obviously. Whitmore's a pretty good shooter, but like, it's not like the Thompsons are better shooters than Anthony Black. So I think it's all up for debate.
I think that it is completely fair, and if you think back to this time last year, like, Dyson Daniels wasn't really considered necessarily a guy who was going to go in the range that he went to. And I'm sure by the end of that process, a lot of people probably had him up closer into that like 4 or 5 range, even in the back half of the top 10 for a lot of the same reasons. And you know, he's really interesting, right? Because you talk about he's not really a great shooter, but his form is completely workable. You know, an NBA team, if I'm looking at that, I'm like, one, he's hitting shots at a decent enough clip, and you know, maybe he's not hitting like a ton of step back off the bounce threes, so you can project him as like a number one option. But like you said, like in this context with Houston, they have more than enough guys in that starting lineup, and they got some guys off the bench who want to do that too. So I think theoretically it is really the type of player that would like Houston needs a connector.
Mm-hmm.
Like they need less guys who want to play individual basketball and more guys who want to play 0.5, keep the ball swinging. I guess, you know, at the top, it comes down to how much untapped potential do you think a guy like Anthony Black has versus, you know, some of these other guys. So where are you at, Albert?
So actually, what I wanted to do was I wanted to ask a follow-up question with what you talked about, Corey, just because, I mean, just in the segment here where you wrote about Anthony Black, Jeremy, you said here in the middle, again, it's early in the process, right? That's what you said with us. And then you said he offers untapped upside as well as a high floor due to his elite size, lead guard, advanced feel, and positive impact on both ends. So when you're looking at a prospect like Anthony Black, or just a prospect in general, right? You as someone who's going out there, you're a well-traveled man. If anyone follows your Twitter account, they'll see that you're literally all over the country. But when you're seeing these guys both on the floor and on tape, how do you weigh ultimately the positive impact that they're having on the floor and on the games that you're watching currently versus the untapped potential and the upside that you can see as well? How does all that, because like something that we do at No Ceilings all the time is we're constantly updating our big board, doing mock drafts just like you. But for me, like I find it really difficult sometimes to weigh those two things against each other to then slot these guys at different spots and have them go up, you know, have them being placed above or below one another. How do you weigh those different aspects in terms of your evaluation of these guys?
Yeah. You know, part of why I really value, you know, having the ability to, you know, thankfully, you know, get around and get to some games and kind of suss it out is because I do think that there's some, like, the way our brains work, like there's like it's sort of an imperceptible thing where it's like you go somewhere and you just kind of like feel it or you don't, and you're watching, and if you're really paying attention, it's like, you know, the more experience you get going to games and watching and scouting, and it's like, you know, I've been doing this for, you know, a decade now, and I had no idea what I was doing when I was in college, you know, learning to you know, try to do this, and you know, now I still don't know always if I know what I'm doing, but at least I have the experience where it's like I sort of trust my own instinct with what I'm watching. So it's like, you know, I think it's important to, you know, watch the game and then go look at how the numbers sort of bear out. Like, you know, some of these stats I do think are pretty good indicators of impact. Like I think box plus minus is pretty useful just in terms of like I don't really like catch-all stats normally, but I do think that is a good one just in terms of like, typically it tells us who the good players are. So it gives you a place to look, or it can reaffirm like that guy's good or he wasn't, right? So like, you know, I'm always kind of cross-checking. But like in terms of positive impact, I mean, it's part of it's in, you know, the plays guys make, part of it is in, you know, the energy and the attitude that they have. You know, and then upside, you know, that's a whole sort of a different conversation where it's, you know, physically, you know, what does this guy have left to gain? You know, what does the best version of this player look like? You know, there's different ways of looking at it. Like, you know, I mean, I'll use an example is like Tyrese Halliburton. Like to me, I loved him really early. Like when he was a freshman at Iowa State, I like stumbled watching him, and he like shot the ball like maybe 5 times, but like he was like huge, just like sirens going off in my head. Like this guy is so just like impactful. And sometimes that's just a good place to start. And so, you know, I do think, I'm not like going to compare them because they're different, but like, I do think the success of a guy like Halliburton sort of turning into a superstar and like maximizing the like crazy feel, just positive impact type player, and then also being able to play point guard, it's probably going to play in Anthony Black's favor on draft night. Like that's just sort of how the NBA thinks a lot of the time. You know, I don't know if he'll go 3 or if he'll go 7 or whatever, but I'm pretty sure he's going to be a top 10 pick, and I think it's going to be, you know, someone's going to take a bet on that. I mean, like Giddey is another, I think, pretty decent comp people use with Black, where like Giddey wasn't like the way he's shooting it now, no one thought he was going to be shooting this well in 5 years from now, and he's done it already. So it's like just having that and just being really smart and being being able to be out there, defensively, he has size. He makes the right play all the time. He's not selfish. Like that's kind of what's working in the NBA right now. And if you think about the guys who were, if you think about in the last couple of drafts, like who are the rookies who are like struggling to earn minutes or like earn playing time? It's oftentimes just the guys who are raw and like don't give the coaches much of a reason to play them, right? You think about the Kumingas and guys like that. Players in that mold. It's like it's just harder to find minutes for those guys sometimes if you're trying to win. So I think that all has to be kind of factored in. Like you kind of know Anthony Black's going to get in the game. Whereas like if you look at like if you use the Thompson twins just as a point of comparison, like their upside is higher. Like I'm not going to argue that. Like Amen particularly with his passing and stuff, his upside is crazy high, but. There's the risk of, what if he's on your team and suddenly he's not doing what you thought he was, and can you find a minutes if you're trying to win? And so, these are all things that go into these picks, and it can't just be boiled down to one thing. But I'm rambling here, but that's kind of what I'm thinking about with, when we're talking about who's the number 3 pick, like that's probably a call I'm going to write at some point, like onto it, because it's interesting discussion unto itself. But like, these are all different factors in it.
Yeah, I think even like Kuminga versus like Franz.
Right,
like
exactly.
In that era, right? Like,
right.
Franz was a guy that you knew, like, okay, maybe he doesn't have that high. Well, I mean, maybe he does. We're seeing now he does have that high end upside, but he wasn't, projected to have this crazy upside that he's even showing. But it's like you knew he was going to get on the floor because he was a good passer. He could defend multiple positions. He was really heady and smart, had good feel. I do think that there is like an interesting push-pull on evaluators on how to value that type of thing, and the Thompson twins are interesting. They're honestly, Amen is one of the more difficult prospects that I've ever had to try to evaluate, because I've now seen him like multiple times in person, and like there are things that I find are obviously so incredibly impressive, and there are things where I'm like, what am I missing that everybody else is seeing sometimes? And it's one of those things in my gut that I just get a little like, I want to throw up sometimes when I think about where I have to rank him. And if I was actually making that decision, it's like I would have to have so much trust in my development team and my shooting coaches. And it's a really interesting thing, because there's easily a world where a guy like Anthony Black is more impactful to winning games than a guy like Amen Thompson, because they kind of do a lot of the same things. Amen just does it while being shot out of a rocket ship at the same time, right? Like they're both guys who you kind of want to get downhill, make plays for other guys with their rim pressure, and then hopefully they can both shoot from the outside a little bit. Yeah. Part of my thing, like Amen, sometimes I almost go like, is he almost a ceiling? Like he has this unlimited ceiling. That's why the appeal, right? Almost, because if he figures out how to shoot. But like, if he doesn't, is he a ceiling capper? To where like, if you're giving him the keys, how far can he actually take you, versus a guy like Anthony Black, where he might not be driving the car, but he's got the auxiliary cord and he's like killing the playlist, and you're having like a great time in the car, So it is like this interesting push pull for arguments for and against, guys like that.
Yeah. No, for sure. Actually, and to kind of piggyback off, well, first off, Corey, the Amen stuff, how I've always felt about Amen. Like I get it, the high end skills, the athletic ability, all that stuff is awesome. But like, if he just can't shoot, then he scares me so bad. And if anything, something we've talked about when we did our Ausar breakdown, I just think he's way ahead of him right now as a shooter than Amen is. And I think there are better signs and clearer pathways in my mind where Ausar becomes a better shooter and also has the passing ability that Amen has, and also the athletic ability as well. So in a lot of sense, I mean, Corey, you and I are kind of on the same page where we have Ausar above Amen right now. But yeah, actually, maybe that's a good follow-up question for us to ask Jeremy right now. Jeremy, how do you like? You've mentioned the Thompson twins and how they have the ceiling. For both of us, I think we both have Ausar over Amen, and some people may take that and say that, hey, you guys are crazy and it could be controversial or whatever. Just was wondering what your overall thoughts are on the Thompson twins, and obviously outlook wise, it's like, yeah, like they have all this potential, ceiling super high, but the interesting thing is both of you guys talked about your gut, right? And that's something that I guess for me, as I'm still newer, I'm still trying to develop my gut and take the probiotics and have a healthy gut in terms of my scouting. But for you, Jeremy, wondering in your gut, how do you feel about these twins? And obviously they're getting a lot of love and a lot of highlights and people love talking about them. But in your gut, how do you feel about them at this juncture?
Yeah. It's a very tough evaluation. And I'll put it this way. And this is kind of what I've been saying a lot of the season is it's like, I think to me, the biggest thing that scares me, not necessarily even just with them, but just like generally with really, guys who are going to be, lottery picks, like the high leverage, like risk reward part of the draft. It's just like the unknown that anytime there's a guy who's making like a massive, like unquantifiable jump in level, that scares the shit out of me. Like when I'm drafting, and it's nothing wrong with them. It's just in general, that's just something that is part of the evaluation here. And like, I'll make a point, like, last year, like I really liked Johnny Davis and he's been not very good so far. And, I hope he'll figure it out. And I do think he will at some point. He's probably not going to be what people thought he was. I think at this point we know that, but I think it kind of goes back to, and again, this isn't really a knock on him, but it's like, I went to a ton of Wisconsin games last year and it never quite occurred to me. It's like, hey, the stuff they're doing, like, does not translate. It is not the same type of basketball. Like, their system is so rigid, doesn't really put him in spots to improvise. It played some to his strengths a bit, but just, point being, like, I think that was just not a translatable system. So like, level is one thing, but also like what type of basketball are you playing? And the Wisconsin system like doesn't really translate great to the NBA, in my opinion. But they win games. But so like to that point, having been thinking about that, I just wonder if there's some of that baked in here with the Twins, and it's they are not coming out of college. I do think I like them both as people, and I think they're both going to work. And like I don't really worry about them as guys. Like I've talked to them both a bunch of times, and I like them. So like it's going to help them that I think people will want to draft them more after you meet them. Like that's going to help
for sure.
But back to the actual basketball, it's like I kind of go back and forth. I don't think you guys are crazy to say, Asar is the better prospect. Like it kind of, there's two ways of looking at it. And I think upside wise, a men's upside is just higher. Just because there's more, at least there's a chance he plays point guard. I don't know how confident I am yet that happens, but it's not, it's an outcome. And, Asar, I think maybe his floor is higher just because, like you said, he is shooting it a little bit better. He's playing a role now that at least is kind of,
right,
equivalent with what he'll be doing in the long run. He's, I think he can be a really, really good defender. I'm not exactly sure how good a scorer he is yet. Like if he's really going to be a guy you want to give the ball to, but again, if he just figures out how to like play off and guard and bring energy, and they're both going to be so good in transition, like that's still pretty valuable. So it's just a matter of like, how do you weigh that relative to what else is there in the draft? Because you can only pick who's available, and that's what's going to dictate who goes where. I think in the case of Amen, I guess what scares me a little bit is just what if it turns out that he isn't ready to play point guard, and then what do you do with him if that's the case? Like, he's going to be older. You're probably not going to want to send him to the G League. Like if he's your third or fourth or fifth pick, like you're going to want to give those guys minutes. But if he's not ready to run the team, and he has to kind of play off, like and he's not shooting well, it's going to be tough. And even if he is playing point guard, everyone's going to go under on screens. They're going to load up to the right, just try to make him uncomfortable. I think OTE, it's cool. The level is basically high school, but you're not getting heavily schemed against. I don't think there's a lot of open play. You can see their speed. You can see how good they are getting into the paint. But they're also a lot older than some of these guys. So there's different things you have to think about here. They're both really good prospects. But I just, part of why, what I've I've just been trying to hammer this home. That it's not like a sure thing that they're going to go in the top 5. Like I think there are a lot of different ways this can go, and I've just been trying to like just get that across. Like it's not their fault. It's just like it's not a lock. Like there's a lot of different things that are going to happen still.
Yeah, the draft, if we've learned anything, is completely unpredictable. Even when we have people reporting that the number 1 pick is locked in 30 minutes prior to the draft, and then ultimately it shifts right away, right? Like whatever we think we know is going to happen, that's what makes the draft so much fun, is we know that that's not actually how it's going to play out in real time. And when we look back on the mock drafts and whatnot, like the actual order, because all it takes is one team to like throw a wrench into something and make everybody's board looks discombobulated. I want to go backwards a little bit because the guy that you have at number 5 just really puts a smile on my face. He's my favorite prospect in the draft. And I'm talking about Jarace Walker. And, I think Jarace has been a guy that a lot of people have had differing opinions on. I've, heard media people who were like, I have him in 15 to 20. I came into the year and I still have him at 3rd on my personal board. He's one of those guys when we're talking about Anthony Black, I look at Jarace Walker and I see another guy who looks a lot like what the NBA really loves, in 6'8", 7'2" wingspan, grown man strength, versatile skill set. And I think I was prepared for him to go into Houston and not kind of show everything he got to show in high school offensively. But I kind of know it's there. And when I look at how he might be used at the NBA level, I go, this guy looks every bit of a top 5 pick. So what got you to Jarace as a top 5 guy? He's had a couple of really good games recently. He's had some, quieter games recently. How do you feel about Walker as a prospect in the long term?
Yeah, I think I'd have to go back and look. I don't have it in front of me, but like I think I had him pretty high to start the season, like 6 or 5 or 7 or something. And I think he's a really, really safe pick. Just because the value of guys like that who not only can play out of a lot of different spots in the floor on offense, but also can probably defend 3s, 4s, maybe play some small ball 5, like in certain situations. Like I think that's just the versatility that brings is really, really valuable. And that's something that's, particularly with his body type, like guys like that don't tend to fall very far, in the draft. Like, again, he's not like giant. He's like 6'7", 6'8". He's not bigger than 6'8". But it's impressed me because like I've watched Jarace for a long time. And I remember watching him when he was, I guess, a freshman or a sophomore in high school, and he was a turnover machine. And I'm like, dude, like this is not going to work. And then over time, you watch him again. And I think like by the time we got to like last spring and it was, McDonald's game and all those different things, like it was kind of evident that he had kind of bought into doing the smaller stuff. And as soon as I saw that, I'm like, okay, like I'm willing to be open-minded with this. He was really good his senior year of high school, I thought. Yeah, I watched a few of those games with IMG. I didn't watch every single game, but it was enough to know, he can really pass. I went and saw Houston play Oregon early in the season just to like make sure I saw them early. He's going to have to make enough shots. I think he probably will. I don't think he's going to be a volume 3-point shooter, but that's okay. But there's just, I think, a lot that he brings. And it's a unique package. And when all that stuff is kind of rolled into one player, like that's really nice. Like, he can pass. He'll score a bit. He's not going to be a volume scorer. That's fine. Like,
yeah.
But just the defensive versatility and, now that he is, I think he picked a good school for him. Like, it's not, no, if you go to Houston, you average 10 points. Like, it's okay. Like, that's, if you consider the context. And, he rebounds, he, is active. Like, all that stuff I think is going to work. He makes, I think he's successfully kind of become what people hoped he was going to be. He's on the right track, which is exciting, I think, to me.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And he gives me a lot. Like if he slips a little bit towards like that 10 to 14 range in the lottery for whatever reason, like I can't help but think like we're gonna look back at him as kind of like the Bam Adebayo of this class, who was another guy who kind of obviously far exceeded expectations and developed his offensive game in really interesting ways. I want to read a Bart Torvik query quickly. which is not how anybody should only be doing their evaluations, but it's fun to play with. Usage over 20, defensive rebounding percentage over 18, assist percentage over 12, block percentage over 5, steal percentage over 2.5, 3-point attempts per 100 possessions greater than 3, box score plus minus greater than 7.5 as a freshman. It's Jarace and Zion Williamson since 2008, which obviously Zion, if you look at all the rest of the numbers, they like torpedo into the next galaxy past the stuff that Jarace is doing. But I think just going to show like the versatility in his game, and that doesn't even really touch on any of the like on many of his offensive traits outside of, you know, the passing that he's kind of sort of shown. But it's fun with internet searches, and everyone knows how much I love Jarace here, so I wanted to put that out into the ether.
If I can, Corey, really quickly, you know, I'm right there with you. I've always loved you actually put me onto Jarace, and I've fallen in love, and now he's going nowhere outside my top 5. But I think for me, you mentioned Bam, right? And he got taken a little bit later, and he obviously played better than where he got taken, or maybe, I don't know. Yeah, no, for sure he did. But thinking about even like a couple years back to when Scotty Barnes was taken by the Raptors, right? And I think heading into the draft, I didn't think you and I had him going that high, but he ended up going high. And after his rookie season, what did everyone say, right? There were talks about like rumors are like, okay, will the Raptors be willing to let Scotty Barnes go for Kevin Durant? Were the type of, you know, conversations we were having over the summer. And I think Walker, obviously they're not the same player, but Walker, I mean, you look at the body type, you look at the passing, right? The handle on him, the shooting, like we when we did his breakdown, we were in love with his touch around the rim, the mid-range jumper, the form, everything is, I think it's going to be there. And Jeremy, like you said, regardless of how good of a shooter he is, I don't think any team's going to be expecting him to be putting up 15, 20 shots a game, right? So I think the role that he's going to play with the measurables that he has and the skill set versatility that he has, that he's going to offer on both ends of the floor, that just looks like NBA. Like you should just stamp NBA on his forehead and be like, yeah, you're going to figure this out, is how I feel. I think he's going to be awesome.
Yeah, I think he's a pretty easy eval in that way. Like it's just a lot of good things, and he's going to check the boxes physically. You know, it's not something that I think has to be overcooked. Like it's going to work, and it just depends on who has the pick. But like again, Patrick Williams was the 4th pick in that draft,
right.
You know, a few years ago, and he hasn't done a ton yet. But it was kind of a similar idea. But you can argue Jarace is a more fully formed player, so it's, you know, kind of the same thing. Like big guy who is kind of versatile and kind of does stuff like well. And Patrick, it was more guessing, and with Jarace, he's already doing more of it. So yeah, you know, I think that probably bodes in his favor.
I also think like if Houston has like a big tournament run, like we're going to see his, you know, stock as far as the discourse around it kind of, you know, really turn up to a new level around that time. Speaking of interesting internet discourse, let's talk about Brandon Miller a little bit, because we haven't talked about him on this show since the preseason. What have you thought about the discourse around Miller as a prospect recently?
Yeah, so honestly, like I only loosely know to what you're referring. Like I think I saw a couple tweets about it, but like I've been super offline this season, which has been amazing. So like I can't pretend to know exactly what is being said about anyone on the internet. I honestly don't know. Yeah, I mean, I think Brandon is someone who is, you know, in the conversation as high as 3 in terms of NBA scouts. You know, I was in Portland for the PK85, so I sat and watched him. I saw him twice. I didn't go to that crazy 4 overtime game, which he played badly in, but I think that was like the third game in 3 days, so I wouldn't really stress that. But we were all tired. But yeah, like, you know, obviously he fits a mold where it's like big guy who makes shots. Something that obviously has value. If it pans out, is always a valuable player to have. You know, someone threw out like the Paul George thing to me. I think it's more of like Brandon Ingram is the one that I've used that I think is maybe a better point of comparison. Like, I don't think he's as good of a prospect as Ingram, but he's probably kind of in that vein because it's, you know, physically he's a little bit underdeveloped. I don't think he is as quick and like, you know, you watch Ingram, he's just really kind of smooth and has his own, he just like kind of glides. Yeah. And he's always kind of been like that, even when he didn't have like a full grown man body. You know, Brandon, when he was 15, could still kind of move.
Yeah.
I don't think Brandon Miller is as deceptive as that, but he does make shots, and like again, we can only draft what's there. And I think if you argue, well, how many other big shot making wings are there in this draft? I mean, it's like who are like really shot makers. I think he is one. Then it's like a pretty short list. So like, I wouldn't. I've kind of gone back and forth. Like if I'm being totally honest, like there was times where I feel like there's something missing there, kind of. But he's teams winning. He keeps performing pretty well. And I don't think it's something that's going to get overthought too much, like just because of what he is and the value that can be. So my guess is he'll go in the top 5 to 8. He could go 3. He could fall a little bit. It just depends. I think I want to see. I'm going to go see him again later in the season and like really decide like where I would take him. But the just the basis of what he is, I think makes sense.
Yeah, he's 6'9" guys who can shoot 40%, handle a little bit, pass a little bit, and probably defend a couple of positions. It's kind of something a little bit easy to not overthink that. What have you thought about kind of like how he's improved his finishing over the last like 10 games or so versus how he started? Do you think he kind of was just surprised by the level of and the speed of the game and the physicality of college? Do you think it was kind of a little bit of maybe luck in bad luck to start the year, and maybe now it's kind of averaging out a little bit? Because I mean, he is skinny. He's probably going to have some of those same issues at the next level when things get a little bit even more physical and fast. But what do you think about him trending it, kind of towards the basket as a finisher?
Yeah. So honestly, I haven't watched a ton of Alabama since I was there.
Okay.
So I can't speak to like exact specifics about anything he's doing. I do think there's probably some element of adjustment, just getting more comfortable. I'm looking at his box scores now. Yeah. I mean, like, it makes sense that he would get more comfortable. Again, it's like, I think probably some of the finishing stuff was also spiked by the 2 of 13 against North Carolina in 4 overtimes, which was, again, their third game in 4 days, and they played 4 overtimes. He played 48 minutes. Like, I'd throw that game out. So like, there's some element of that, but I think, he's not a power finisher. Like, he's not going to be finishing through bodies. He's not dunking on people. It's going to be more based on like skill and finesse.
Yeah.
And just be able to like pick your spots, as a skinnier guy. So like, yeah, I would really need to like go back and I probably need to do a little bit of catch up on that to like give you a real opinion.
Okay.
But I also like, I think sometimes we're always too quick. People are too quick to be like, oh, 10 games, this is a problem. Like, no, just like let it bear out, because these are also people who are, in new situations and, adjusting to things. Like the worst thing you can do is like overreact to anything. Just like, like if it looks like he can finish, then he can probably finish. And I think finishing is one thing you can kind of see, right? Like that's the type of thing where, sometimes the numbers look weird, but if you look at like the way people finish and like their body types and like the angles they're taking, like that's the type of thing you can kind of like, I think the eye test can kind of quantify that pretty well. And sometimes in a way where numbers can just be random. So.
Dude, I think for me, the one thing I'm currently, he's listed at 6'9", 200. Clearly needs to put on some weight. I'm heavier than Brandon Miller right now, but I think with him, the biggest thing that I wrote about when I wrote my piece on him, and that you see on film, and I'm sure I haven't seen him in person yet, but I feel like just in terms of his frame, like it just looks like a frame that's gonna, obviously Corey and we talk about like the grown man strength that comes in for literally everybody eventually, but I think for him, like the biggest thing is like I look at his shoulders and I'm like, oh yeah, he's gonna add size, no problem. And once he adds weight and he's in an NBA conditioning program, NBA diet, whatever it is, whatever the NBA fad diet is right now, I don't know if guys are all doing the vegan stuff anymore, but I just think in an NBA program with NBA experience, and then I just think he's got the frame to get bigger and stronger, where I'm with you guys. I don't think he'll ever be like a power finisher, but I do think with his skill and finesse that he has right now, and then he adds that grown man strength and he adds to his frame, I think he's going to be just fine. And I think the key to what both of you guys are saying is I think a lot of people made some really definitive statements and definitive judgments about his finishing without even letting him finish his freshman season. So I'm 100% with you guys. I think this type of stuff takes time, and his floor once again, and the base skill set that he has as a shooter and a guy who can even do stuff with the ball in his hands is unbelievable. So you just add some strength into his frame with all of that, and you have a really high end prospect, and which is why I think he absolutely deserves to be in this part of the conversation.
Yeah, I'm going back and just glancing at like my notes that I had from Portland, and like, yeah, like I had some questions about like just getting to the rim because he's not great with his left. And again, he's not, like we said, not super powerful. He does have some finesse, but he's not going through bodies, and he's not like super fast getting downhill. But again, it's like, you know, picture him if you could, you know, run him off a screen, and then a guy is trailing him, and then he has a step to either go downhill or shoot like a 12-footer. Like, he's probably going to be really hard to guard because he can shoot over people in those situations. So like, you know, again, it's like, it's important to look at all this, but you know, sometimes I think part of the problem is like sometimes we look like way too closely at like one little thing and then make it about everything, or we step too far back and you miss like the details. But like, there's somewhere in the middle, I think, with scouting that it's kind of usually where the answer is.
Yeah, I think, you know, that's what makes it you know, hard too, because, you know, there is a lot of nuance to kind of figure out, and it's like, you know, solving a mystery with some of these guys. I think one of the guys I'm interested to hear your opinion on, because it's I think it's the highest I've seen this guy, and I don't think it's crazy at all. And partly I think it's one of the highest places I've seen this guy go in a mock is because he's not playing domestically, and that's Rayan Rupert from the Breakers, and you had him going 13, so in the lottery to the Jazz, but even not taking team fit into account, Rupert in the lottery again, I think could make a lot of sense, but it isn't something that we're seeing a whole lot of, because he was, you know, injured for a little bit, but he's come back. So what is kind of the reasoning behind, is this anything you're hearing kind of behind the scenes from guys who are a little bit more plugged in, having, you know, maybe going and having seen him for a couple of years and seeing him in person? Is this more of your feel? What's going on with Rupert? Because he's a guy that, again, fits the way the modern NBA kind of wants to play. So he's an intriguing guy that I feel like this space hasn't really talked about a lot yet.
Yeah. I mean, you know, I've never seen him live, so like there's that caveat where I just haven't seen him yet in person, and I probably won't until the NBA. But man, I love this guy. Like, you know, I watched actually like more than I expected to. I watched a decent amount of his last summer, where I was like taking a few weeks to kind of like look at just preliminary stuff. Like, I really liked everything I saw from him. Like, he, you know, he's so long, like, you know, defensively,
yeah.
And I think he that's part of his identity is he likes guarding. Like, he's got shit to him. Like, he can do those things where I think we don't always assume like European wings like want to do that stuff, but he seems to like really want to do it in terms of, you know, getting in the passing lanes. You know, he'll guard the ball handler. He's really big. He's long. He's disruptive. Like, and he knows how to play. And so like, again, it's like I think that's the type of thing where typically guys trend up. You know, I think I personally, I think I like him a little bit more than I did Ousmane Dieng last year.
Okay.
Just because I think what Rupert does, it's more, I think the word I used was like pragmatic. Like, it's just like the stuff he does is helpful. Whereas Ousmane, it was like, yeah, maybe he's going to be really smooth and make a ton of shots, but like, what if not? What if he doesn't?
Theory.
Like,
he's
right,
a theory
exactly,
guy.
Exactly. And if he doesn't, then like, what else is he doing? And, you know, we'll see how that bears out. But yeah, Rupert, I think it's someone, you know, I hear positive stuff. Like, I haven't heard anyone who doesn't like him yet. Like, it's not like I'm asking everybody, but
Sure.
You know, it's the type of profile where I think it's going to trend up. And I watched the first game where he came back. I watched his minutes. His games are easy to watch because he usually will only play like 15, 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Just, like, get through the rest.
Bang him out.
But his minutes are easy to watch, and like, he makes plays. And he's active, and it looks like he's making shots. So like, I think as long as he makes shots, like, guys that size who know how to play and are good defenders and make shots, like, that's the guy who's going to make money on 2 or 3 contracts in the NBA. So like, you know, to me, if that's what you're getting at 13, great. But again, it's all relative. And, you know, we've seen, I mean, I think that range to me, like, that's the interesting thing about this draft is I almost think the top like obviously great top 2, and then 3 to 7 or 8 or whatever. Like, I don't know exactly who the guys are. You can argue it a lot of ways, but then I think there's going to be really interesting value in that next tier, like going down even to like 17 or 18. Like, I guess I had Jet Howard at like 18, and then he had this great game last week. I'm like, oh, maybe that was too low. Like, I'm rethinking it a little bit. Like, he could go high. Like, Derek, I don't know what he's going to do, but it's like they're interesting guys, I think, in the teens, and I think that's a good range to pick in this draft. So if you get him there, I think it's awesome. It's a great development pick.
Derek is an interesting conversation because he's a guy who's returning. He returned from injury, a lower body injury, which you injure any part of your lower body, probably have to stay off of it for the most part. So your conditioning is going to be rough coming in. You're coming into Division I basketball, so I mean, if for anybody who's like just not played pickup for like 2 months and then tried to go to LA Fitness, you feel like you're going to die. This guy's going into an incredibly high level. So he started off really slow, and I think things are trending up a little bit with him, but still there's part of me, even saying all of that is a little worried, because it's a lot of stuff I was a little bit worried about coming into the year, where everything just seems a little bit tough. I think trying to think to like similar situation with AJ Griffin, who was coming back from an injury, it almost felt like AJ bought in to like, all right, I am going to play off of all of these guys and figure out how to do this kind of like off ball spot up shooter. Maybe I could, when if I have an opportunity to create a little bit, I'll show it. I'll try to cut when I can. And with Derek, I feel like he's struggling to find that middle ground between being who he is and fitting into this team. And it's making it a really hard evaluation, because he's obviously super talented. I mean, he had a ton of success on the high school circuit and in the all-star games and whatnot. But right now there are moments where it's like just super, super rough. And then you'll see like sprinkled in some of those flashes where you're like, oh, that's the thing you want to buy into. I don't know. For me, Albert, I don't know where you're at with Derek. He's been tough for me.
I think, Corey, we've had, I think in private, we've had some conversations about Derek and guys like Derek. And I think that eval's always going to be tough. And just like, I don't know, I feel like the overall theme of what we've talked about today is that the sample size of the players that we're talking about are so small, and development in general, growth and development, as the old saying goes, is never linear, right? And so for us to look at these players in such a small window and to make definitive statements, I think is like almost like foolishness, right? And but I'm with you. Like, what we've seen so far from Derek on the floor at Duke, right? If we're taking the part of what the actual production is and what that actually looks like Corey, I can't deny that my gut does not feel great about what I've seen, right? But then again, you get to the theoretical side of what Derek could be, right? He's got decent size to him. He's got some athleticism to him. Defensively, like Tyler Metcalf of No Ceilings, has been singing his praises for years now in terms of what he looked like as a defender before his senior season, right, in high school, and how there's potential there. And then you talk about the shooting upside and things like that. But I think overall, for me, where I'm at currently is I can't deny what we've seen so far. And you see on Twitter and you see people posting highlights like, look, Derek's, he's coming back, right? He looks better. And it's like very minimal stuff so far. So for me, overall, I would say I think the 18 to 25 range is kind of where I'm sitting at in terms of where he gets taken. And I think that's totally fair. But of course, considering once again the theoretical side of his game, he may end up being a guy who plays way better than where he ends up getting drafted. But it's kind of unavoidable considering the fact that, as you mentioned, Corey, he is coming back from injury and playing on a Duke squad that isn't so great this year either.
Not that fun to watch.
Not the best situation to be in is kind of how I feel. And I'm curious to hear what you have to say too, Jeremy, just because it hasn't been the most fun watch, whether for him or for the team as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, there are a few interesting parts of the conversation here. Like, I think one, anytime there's a situation where it's a team with a lot of freshmen and like none of them are playing well, that's just something that has to be like kind of carefully parsed. Like, when no one is playing their best basketball, like, is it a sign that they're all suddenly really bad, or is it a sign that just like something's not working? And usually it's more of the latter. So, maybe Duke, hits their stride, in a month or two or whatever over the next, couple months. But I don't know if we can assume that happens, right? So that's just going to be a challenge, just on the surface level, is with all of those guys, whichever ones decide to enter the draft. But with Dariq, like, I think I always liked him in high school, but I also think that maybe the narrative around him being like a superstar like was probably always not correct. Like I never like felt like that, because he's not super big for a wing. He's like 6'4", 6'5". He's athletic, but he's not like a crazy mover or like separator. Yeah. And what scared me, coming into this season with him, I don't know how much this was like really reflected in where I was projecting, because like at a certain point you kind of just have to like throw the names that are kind of like in the mix, but was just that he seemed a little bit too reliant from what I had seen lately last year, just a little too reliant on shooting tough jumpers when he's not like really a shooter. Like he can make shots, but he's not like a dead eye shooter, right? So like I was worried about that. Like he wasn't getting to the rim a ton. Now I think also you factor in he's still really young for the class. Going to be better basketball ahead for him. But at the same time, it's like, what else is he going to add? Like, what is he going to get better at? Like, yeah, he'll maybe make more shots and whatnot, but like, will he really get more dynamic, like getting guys off the dribble? Like, I just don't think his game is like shake and bake, right?
Yeah.
So if he's not really like an ISO player, and if he is reduced to a guy who has to rely on hitting a lot of shots, like there's a chance that doesn't work that great. That's a profile it's tricky. I do think the youth will, get him some benefit of the doubt. Like he'll be a first round pick. I don't know where yet, because I think, one trend, like a lot of the guys who I talk to in the NBA, like there's like a show me aspect after a certain point where it's like, you get a little grace period to adjust, but now it's like, if you're not producing, then like, what are you, what are you looking at? Right. Like it's hard to get picked in the top 10 when you're not producing. Particularly, I think, when you have a reputation coming in, and like, I saw him play when he was an 8th grader on Montverde, and like on the varsity, he got like 5 minutes. And I was like, who is this? And, so like he's someone we've known about for a long time. But sometimes when those guys, maybe this is wrong, but sometimes I think when there are names that we've been aware of for so long, and then they don't live up to maybe what people hope for, maybe there's bias the other way where it's, frustration, right? So like, it's important to not let that get in the way. But he's tricky. And it's just like, from what I've seen, like, I think one of the games that I saw, or I was in New York when they played Iowa, and he was better in that game. Like he looked faster. I haven't watched him closely probably since then. But it's just a matter of like, by the end of the season, where is he athletically? Like, will he be able to convince people that he has more there? I think that's kind of what we're waiting to see. But again, the fact that Duke is sort of a messy, just like production situation right now, because they're just trying to win games any way they can. I think that makes it tough.
Yeah, I agree. He's almost like the inverse of like the Anthony Black conversation a little bit, where he's like trying to fit a square into a round hole at times. And that Duke roster is interesting, and I want to stick with it a little bit. Albert, if I know you might have to run, if you do, you could say goodbye to the people so you don't, Irish exit on everyone.
No, I apologize, because I actually have another work call to take. But Jeremy, really appreciate you coming on and joining us. And I'll talk to everyone later.
Yeah, no worries.
Later, man. All right. So I do want to stick with Duke, but I want to expand it out a little bit to include Kel'el Ware. So I want to talk about like Lively and Kel'el Ware. Obviously, both guys have really failed to, I guess, live up to the expectation that was set for them in the preseason. I was skeptical. I think I had both guys hovering around like the 20 mark on my preseason rankings, just because I was like, the NBA doesn't value bigs, as highly as they used to. And I guess you really had to buy into like the shooting of both of those guys to kind of believe in them as kind of like this new age unicorn type of prospect. But, with Lively, who I'm still not like super high on, I do feel like watching him at Duke and the situation that, he's in, similarly to some of these other guys, like you said, they're young guys trying to figure this out. It does feel like this is like the worst possible scenario for a guy like him, who is like this rim running, lob catching guy who, yeah, maybe he hits threes eventually, but like his main thing is going to be like cleaning up the garbage on the offensive glass, like being in the dunker spot, just like an at the rim finishing guy on a team that doesn't really have like a ton of like creation the way that he'll probably have it at the next level. And then I think defensively, he's actually probably been pretty good, like about what I expected. Like I think he's been a pretty good defender. He's been versatile schematically. Like you could still envision him, doing a lot of positive things on that end. And I can't help but feeling like there is going to be like, there's been this like massive drop for him from where he was in the preseason. But I also feel like it probably should get to a point where it kind of levels out, because he does still do a lot of interesting things when you think of him less as a college player and more in like an NBA context. And I think, Ware kind of similarly. I mean, he's not playing a ton of minutes, and it's hard for that kind of situation to find consistency. And again, he doesn't have like dynamic playmaking. Like I think both of those guys would probably look a lot better if they were playing alongside like Taron Armstrong rather than the guards on their team. So where are like you at, and what are you kind of hearing about like how far are these guys really gonna drop, or like is it just internet discourse that's pushing them down a board? Like, our NBA teams, do you think they're going to ultimately end up higher when they see them in person and get them for workouts and whatnot?
No, I mean, like, honestly, so, I was able to see both guys like pretty extensively early because I was in Portland, obviously, as I said before. And then I went to that Houston, Oregon game. So I saw Lively twice and Lively 3 times, and I saw Ware twice early. And so I think I have a fairly good grasp of the situation here. And I think it's totally up in the air, like 100% up in the air for both. Because they're both going to have to win the battle of, do you like to play basketball? Like, what are you? I mean, it sounds funny, but it sometimes boils down to that. Like
100%.
We see talented freshmen sometimes. It's like, why are they not playing more minutes? Well, there's a coach who's trying to win games, and like they're not here to necessarily develop you if you're not going to put in the right type of stuff and impact the game to get enough minutes. And so, they're both. It's fair to say, they are both playing behind experienced centers. Like, Ryan Young is the guy at Duke who is taking more minutes because he produces, and Feli Dante, also really productive at Oregon. So it's like these guys that have not won these jobs because they haven't been that as impactful consistently enough. So that's an element here, and teams have to look at that too. Like, if you can't get on the court right now on your college team, like, what are you going to do for us? Like, how long are we going to have to wait? Because there's only so much patience that I think teams have for these guys before you see them go on to another team. And just that question, if that's really a question, how high can you take a guy like that where you're not sure what you're getting? Because these rookie contracts are it's such a high value pick if you're trying to build a winning team, because it's not, comparatively to your whole cap sheet, it's not that expensive. So you want to nail that. And if you have to wait 2 years to, say you take one of those guys at like 15 or 16, you have to wait 2 or 3 years to even know if you're going to have a player. I mean, that's a really tough, just objective, strategic question, right? Like, sometimes we boil down scouting, but also it's like, well, there's strategy and elements that go into building a team and winning games that people I think sometimes get missed when we're talking about who is a good finisher and who can block shots and that type of shit. So like, I think like with Lively, I liked him in high school, but I think he had a really good peach jam, and then people stopped thinking critically about it. He played at like a pretty small high school, like Westtown school. They don't play great comp, so I think he probably wasn't pushed. There's probably an element of that, and now he's being pushed and it's not going great. So like, I mean, I'm looking right now, and as of today, he's shot 15 free throws this season, which is crazy.
Yeah. When you live at the rim,
he's been in the line like 5 times. So like, are we really talking about a guy who's going to punish people at the rim, or are we talking about a guy who has no offensive impact? Right. Like, yeah, you can catch a lob, and you're right. I think you make a good point about like, Roach and Proctor probably is a guy who's going to be better eventually. But like, they're not really running stuff to like throw lobs to the rim. That's like not what they're doing. So that element isn't there. But Lively also, like, he's not a freaky athlete. Like, he doesn't have like what Mitchell Robinson had, which is like, at least this guy is you know he's athletic enough for the NBA. Like, you know he can be physically dominant. Like, Lively's not even doing that. Like, he's not he hasn't, been super, super productive. And again, there's time for that to tick up. But it's because when you don't come out of the gate showing who you are, teams are always going to question, what is really what we're looking at here? You're going to get that label, and it's hard to shake the low motor thing. If we're talking about Khalil, like, it's kind of the same thing where, let me pull up his stats too. I'm just curious because I haven't looked in a minute. But it was kind of the same thing where it's like, a lot of the time he's just kind of lazing around, like, coming into the season. I also, and again, I was at games where he was kind of productive, but like, I think in that loss to UConn, almost all of his production came when the game was like way out of hand, I want to say.
Yeah.
He had 2 points against Houston when I was there. So it's like, I always thought Ware was overrated just coming into this year to begin with. Like, I wouldn't have put him in top 10 or whatever, just because like, I think there's an element sometimes of like, we overrate the guys who are on the USA under 19 team because we see them. Like,
right.
There are certain things, like, just because we can see it and we have a sense of it doesn't necessarily mean anything in the context of the whole draft where there are a lot of players.
Yes.
But sometimes we all fall prey to that, right? So like, he had the exposure and it's easy to see his body and the fact he can kind of shoot and like get interested. But again, it comes back down to like, does this guy he doesn't play hard consistently. He hasn't earned the minutes consistently. And his minutes, I mean, it troubles me without knowing what's going on. His minutes have gone down since I saw him last, in November.
Yeah, they're just treading in the wrong direction.
So it's like, I don't really feel like I even have to watch him that close because I know what he can do. It's just a matter of like, are you going to get out of your own way? And is that going to change? I don't know.
Yeah.
So it's hard for me to say that guy's worth a top 20 pick. So for me, like, my answer would just be, I would just not take a center. Like, I would
yeah.
It can be that easy sometimes. So like,
I agree.
They're both going to get drafted. It's really hard to say. Like, my guess is someone will take a swing. And that can, that can totally vary. But just like the skepticism here is like, not just like a mirage. Like, it's a thing that, it's hard to get excited about guys who aren't productive.
Yeah. It's like the idea of them sounds cool, but like, the idea doesn't always.
And how many times does it work out the way we want for those guys?
Yeah. Rarely when you have to ask those questions. It's like, rarely. And then you have guys like Clowney and like Taylor Hendricks who maybe could do like, somewhat similar things to what you wanted the idea of those guys to do in the first place. And, they push them down on the board. If you are going to.
What's the common thread is those guys were not hyped,
Right.
I think there's something to that. Like, the guys who, and this is a greater conversation probably about like the culture of, how we're developing players and, the hype that people get. And it's not the kid's fault. A lot of the time, it's like, if you're searching your name on Twitter and someone's like, "Oh, this guy's the best," and you don't know who this guy is, but you're, take the compliment, right? But like, that's one of the things that part of why I stay off Twitter and I try to stay away from making statements about anything is it's like people look at this stuff and if I'm going to say it, I want to feel confident when I'm saying.
Yeah.
And I'd rather just write it in a story where I can contextualize things. So like, that whole discourse I think is bad for players. But the guys who don't have that, Ja Morant, there's a billion cases of the guys who no one expected being
Damian Lillard.
Right, exactly. And it's not like they weren't good to begin with. It's just like they get missed, and then I think they probably have the benefit of not dealing with some of the things that these top guys deal with in terms of what's handed to you.
Mixtapes.
Right, exactly. So like, again, I'm not blaming the players for this because this is a bigger problem with our basketball culture probably, but.
No, undoubtedly.
But I think it is also a factor in terms of like who is overperforming and who's underperforming.
Yeah. All right. So before we finish up here, I think a good way to kind of end this is who are some of the guys you think that who's one guy you think is going to be like a pretty decent riser and a guy who you think is going to kind of fall down your board a little bit on the next iteration? Because even I think you released the last one on January 12th. Even from that time to now, which is only a few weeks, things I feel like have shifted a little bit. So give one guy who you think is going to rise, one guy who you think might fall a little bit.
Yeah. So I'm going to go this week. I'm going to see Bryce Sensabaugh tomorrow. So I might move him up. I have to go see. But he was someone I really liked in AAU, and was curious about coming into the season. Like I think I had him as a first rounder coming in, and I'm happy that that's more or less borne out.
Yeah, that's a great
But
call.
I haven't seen him live since in a little bit, so I'm curious about that. I'm gonna go see Baylor twice this week. And I'm low on George right now just because I saw him have a horrendous game at Marquette and it scared me a lot.
Yeah,
but I'm gonna give him, I'm gonna give him another chance. Like I'm not like writing him off, but I've been lower on him because I've seen like how bad it can be with him. But so I'm gonna go to Baylor, Arkansas on Saturday, and then Baylor plays Texas a couple days later. So I'll go see those guys. But like I think those are guys when I update in February who I have, kind of in the teens where like, yeah, they actually could go up or they could go down. And it's, I try not to overjudge based on what I'm seeing when I'm there because it's just one game.
Yes.
Like, and again, it goes back to like the mental component of like, I've watched a lot of basketball. How do I really feel? And what's my opinion? And it's like, it's hard to really, throw your opinion behind someone you're not confident in. So like, that's going to be a factor is sort of what I see on the road. And I guess in terms of like lower guys who might rise, I mean, like I think Jalen Wilson keeps playing well. Like there's a chance he could go late first. Keontae Johnson is going to be an interesting one with his, if there's a medical concern or not. Off-court stuff, I don't know if that's going to get in the way. But he's interesting. And then I think what's another one? I just saw Baba Miller last week. Wasn't impressed.
Another like idea theory guy.
Yeah, he seems like an idea to me and not a player I draft right now.
Yeah,
but we'll see.
Yeah, it's early for him, and he's coming in the middle of a college season. So if he came in and was lighting the world on fire right away, it would be one of those like oh shit type of players instead of like let's see what he can do.
Right,
but I also think
if he was lighting the world on fire, he'd be like playing for Real Madrid right now.
Yeah, that's probably true as well. Probably true as well. All right, Jeremy, dude, thank you so much for coming on the show and chopping it up with Albert and I. Please, the floor is yours. Tell the people where they could find you on the internet, which you have, decided to stay away from. So, and all of your shots that you take on Jeremy, he's going to avoid it.
The internet's toxic. But my Twitter it's just my name. It's just at Jeremy Woo. And I tweet sparingly. It's either going to be an article or like a bad joke most of the time, which is, there's a niche for that. So
that's like what Twitter was made for.
Yeah, exactly. And I keep it to the bare minimum. But honestly, my life has been so much better not feeling like I have to like constantly be engaging in arguments. So not that I did that to begin with, but even thinking about it stresses me out. So I stay off.
That is the right approach. Everybody, make sure you follow Jeremy, read his work. It is always a worthwhile read. It's fantastic stuff. You can find me at Corey Tulaba. You can follow us at No Ceiling NBA. Head to NoCeilingsNBA.com. Subscribe. It's free, completely free. You get stuff delivered to your inbox Monday through Friday. Make sure you rate, review, leave a comment, share the podcast, subscribe to the YouTube channel, all the good stuff. Thank you, everyone, again for rocking with us. We will be back again next week with another episode going deep on a prospect. Until that time, we out. Peace.